Melissa, is it? We need to discuss the seating arrangements. Mrs. Harrington's voice dripped with barely concealed disdain as she looked me up and down in the upscale Chicago bridal boutique. Given the caliber of guests attending, we think it's best if you sit at table 19, near the kitchen. Table 19? I repeated, my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. But that's not with the family. Well, yes, exactly, she replied, exchanging a meaningful glance with her husband. The head tables are for immediate family and distinguished guests. We have the governor's chief of staff attending, several hospital board members, people of a certain standing. I'm Audrey's mother, I stated simply. Traditionally, parents sit together at the head table. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. Melissa, we understand your position, but you must understand ours. Our son is marrying into a different background than he's accustomed to. Some accommodations must be made to ensure the event maintains the appropriate tone. Their words hung in the air as Audrey emerged from the fitting room in her wedding gown, her face falling as she sensed the tension. My name is Melissa Warner, 48 years old, a single mother who raised my brilliant daughter Audrey on my own after her father abandoned us before she was born. What I want is simple, to be treated with basic dignity at my only child's wedding, and to share in her joy from a place of respect, not hidden away like an embarrassing family secret. Standing in my way are the Harringtons, Eleanor and Walter, whose old money and older prejudices have led them to view me as unworthy of sitting alongside their precious family. Mom, what's going on? Audrey asked, her eyes darting between us. Just discussing the seating chart, darling, Eleanor interjected before I could respond. Nothing for you to worry about on your special day. The seamstress hovering nearby looked uncomfortable as she pinned the final adjustments on Audrey's gown. Your mother and I will work it out, I assured Audrey, unwilling to burden her with this conflict 6 weeks before her wedding. Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course we will. Now, Audrey, about the coordinator's suggestion to limit the receiving line, perhaps just Andrew, yourself, and us would be most efficient? Another subtle exclusion, another quiet erasure. As the appointment concluded and we prepared to leave, Eleanor placed a manicured hand on my arm, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Oh, and the rehearsal dinner will be black tie, she mentioned casually. I assume you'll need time to find something appropriate. The implication was clear. My wardrobe, like my profession, like my very existence, was inadequate for their world. Later, as I drove home to my modest apartment in the suburbs, my phone buzzed with a text from Audrey. Mom, the Harringtons have revised the invitation list again. They've cut Aunt Diane and Cousin Paige without telling me. What's going on? I gripped the steering wheel tighter. This wasn't just about seating arrangements or dress codes. The Harringtons were systematically cutting away pieces of our life to reshape Audrey's wedding into something that erased her history, and me along with it. I've spent 26 years building a life for Audrey and myself, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. When Thomas left me pregnant and alone at 22, I had no college degree, no family support, and no clear path forward. What I did have was determination, and a talent for organization that landed me an entry-level position at Westbrook Communications. While other young mothers might have faltered under the dual pressures of single parenthood and a demanding career, I thrived on the challenge. I arrived early each day to prepare for meetings, stayed late to ensure every detail was perfect, and somehow still managed to make it to Audrey's school events and doctor's appointments. It wasn't easy. There were nights I collapsed into bed still wearing my work clothes, too exhausted to change, but we made it work. By the time Audrey entered high school, I had risen to become executive assistant to Harold Westbrook himself, CEO, and founder of what had grown into a telecommunications empire. It wasn't the glamorous career some might dream of, but it was stable, respected within the company, and it paid for Audrey's prep school, her extracurriculars, and eventually her pre-med education. When Audrey met Andrew Harrington during her medical residency at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, I was thrilled for her. He was kind, brilliant, and clearly adored my daughter. His background, son of Walter Harrington, chairman of the hospital board and heir to the Harrington shipping fortune, was incidental to his personal qualities. At least that's what I thought. Our first meeting with his parents at their Lakeshore Drive penthouse should have been a warning. Eleanor Harrington's eyes had slid past me after the most perfunctory of greetings, her attention focused entirely on Audrey. "And what does your mother do, dear?" she had asked Audrey, not me, as though I weren't sitting right there. "Mom is the executive assistant to the CEO of Westbrook Communications," Audrey had replied proudly. "A secretary," Eleanor had murmured with a tight smile. "How reliable." I had let it go at the time, attributing her dismissiveness to first meeting awkwardness. Over the months of engagement, I continued to give the Harringtons the benefit of the doubt, even as the evidence mounted. The way Walter would talk over me at dinner, how Eleanor would forget to include me in planning emails, their constant references to lineage and private schools whenever I mentioned Audrey's childhood. "They're just old-fashioned," Audrey had said when I gently raised my concerns. "Once they get to know you better, they'll see how amazing you are." I wasn't so sure, but I kept my doubts to myself. This was Audrey's happiness, her future, and I wouldn't let my pride stand in the way of that. But with each wedding planning session, each thinly veiled comment about my simple lifestyle or limited understanding of proper society events, a creeping suspicion grew. The Harringtons weren't just old-fashioned. They were actively hostile to my presence in their son's life, and by extension, they seemed determined to minimize my role in my own daughter's wedding. Still, for Audrey's sake, I smiled and accommodated and compromised. I told myself it was just one day, just one event. I could endure anything for my daughter's happiness. What I didn't realize was how far the Harringtons would go to put me in my place. The rehearsal dinner at the Chicago Yacht Club was everything the Harringtons had promised. Elegant, exclusive, and excruciating. I'd spent more than I could afford on a black cocktail dress that still somehow looked inadequate among the designer gowns and bespoke suits. Andrew's father gave a lengthy toast celebrating the joining of two distinguished families, conspicuously avoiding any mention of me or my side of the family, the side that consisted of my cousin Diane, her daughter Paige, and my elderly Aunt Meredith, none of whom had been invited to this intimate gathering of 60 people. I maintained my composure throughout the evening, even when I discovered I'd been seated at a table with the event photographer and the wedding planner, rather than with any family members. Audrey, caught between family obligations and social demands, could only manage brief moments with me between being paraded around to meet Andrew's extended family and his parents' influential friends. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she whispered during one such moment. "This isn't what I wanted." "It's fine, sweetie," I assured her, squeezing her hand. "Tomorrow is what matters." But tomorrow arrived with new humiliations. I arrived at the Drake Hotel 2 hours before the ceremony, as instructed, only to be directed to a small anteroom while the Harringtons and their family occupied the main bridal suite. "Melissa, there you are," Eleanor said when she noticed me standing awkwardly in the doorway of the main suite where I'd gone looking for Audrey. "The mother of the bride's area is down the hall. The coordinator should have told you." "I was hoping to help Audrey get ready," I explained. "Oh, we have everything well in hand," Eleanor replied, gesturing to the team of stylists surrounding my daughter. "Too many people will just create confusion. Perhaps you should focus on getting yourself ready? The photographer wants the Harrington family photos at 3, and then we'll find time for your pictures with Audrey afterward if the schedule allows." I looked to Audrey, who was having her hair styled, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror with apology and conflict. I could see her distress, her desire to speak up, battling with her reluctance to create tension on her wedding day. "Actually, Mrs. Harrington," the wedding coordinator interjected, checking her clipboard, "the timeline has the bride with her mother first at 2:30, then the Harrington family at 3 o'clock. Eleanor's smile tightened. "There must be a misunderstanding. We discussed this yesterday. The Harrington portraits are the priority, given the number of important family members who need to be included." "But Mom is," Audrey began. Darling, you don't want to start your marriage with unnecessary conflict, do you? Eleanor cut in smoothly. I'm sure your mother understands the practicalities of fitting everything into a tight schedule. The coordinator looked between us uncertainly. It's fine, I said, swallowing my hurt. The schedule can stay as Mrs. Harrington prefers. As I turned to leave, I heard Eleanor murmur to someone, "Such a shame Audrey didn't have a proper maternal figure growing up. Just a secretary raising her alone. No wonder she needed our guidance for this event." The words hit me like a physical blow. I paused in the doorway, my hand gripping the frame as the room seemed to tilt. 26 years of sacrifice, of bedtime stories read despite exhaustion, of second jobs taken to afford dance lessons, of college applications edited late into the night, all dismissed as inadequate because I was just a secretary. In that moment, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just social awkwardness or generational differences in wedding expectations. The Harringtons were deliberately, systematically erasing me from my daughter's most important day. As I walked stiffly back to the small anteroom assigned to me, I passed a mirror and caught sight of my reflection. A woman diminished, made small by others' perceptions. The woman staring back at me looked nothing like the person who had fought through countless obstacles to raise a daughter who was, as of today, becoming a doctor. For Audrey's sake, I would get through this day with dignity, but I was done being invisible, done being just a secretary, done letting the Harringtons define who I was. The ceremony itself was beautiful, a perfect blend of traditional elements and personal touches. Walking Audrey down the aisle, a role the Harringtons couldn't deny me without raising eyebrows, I held my head high despite feeling the weight of judgmental stares from their side of the church. Audrey was radiant, her eyes shining with joy as she exchanged vows with Andrew, and for those brief moments, none of the rest mattered. It was during the reception that the battle lines were drawn more clearly. True to their word, the Harringtons had indeed seated me at table 19, tucked near the service entrance to the kitchen. My closest table mates were Andrew's former piano teacher, the officiant's wife, and several guests I suspected were last-minute additions used to fill seats. As dinner service began, I noticed Eleanor making her way around the room, greeting guests with practiced charm. When she reached my table, her smile dimmed noticeably. "Melissa, I trust everything is to your satisfaction?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was performing a duty, rather than expressing genuine concern. "The table location is unexpected," I replied carefully. "I had hoped to be closer to Audrey during her reception." Eleanor's smile remained fixed. "We seated you with lovely people who wouldn't make you feel out of your depth. I'm sure you understand. Our circle includes many distinguished individuals who might not have much in common with someone of your professional background." The dismissal was so casual, so confident in its cruelty, that I momentarily lost my composure. "My professional background has supported Audrey through medical school," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "That seems rather distinguished to me." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, perhaps surprised by my pushback. "Supporting one's children is what any mother would do," she replied. "Though I imagine it's been a struggle on a secretary's salary. Thank goodness Andrew can provide Audrey with the lifestyle she deserves from now on." Before I could respond, she was called away to address some minor crisis with the cake-cutting schedule. I sat back, my appetizer untouched, a familiar sense of inadequacy washing over me. Had I made a mistake in speaking up? Would my resistance only make things more difficult for Audrey? My phone buzzed with a text from Harold Westbrook. "Venue looks amazing from the photos. You've raised an incredible daughter, Melissa. The office is in good hands with Drew this weekend, but call if you need anything." The message was a lifeline, a reminder that outside this gilded ballroom, I was respected and valued. Harold had been understanding about my need to take 2 days off for the wedding, practically unheard of in his demanding schedule, and had even sent Audrey a generous gift. With renewed determination, I decided to make an effort to engage with the reception despite my isolation. I introduced myself to table mates, danced with my elderly Aunt Meredith, when the band played her favorite song, and made a point of personally thanking the catering staff who seemed surprised by the acknowledgement. During a quiet moment, Audrey found me near the bar. "Mom, I just realized where they seated you," she said, distress evident in her voice. "I had no idea. I would never have approved that." "It's all right, sweetheart," I assured her, squeezing her hand. "This is your day. Don't worry about me." "It's not all right," she insisted. "Let me talk to Eleanor. We can rearrange." "Audrey!" Walter Harrington's voice boomed across the space. "The Prestons are leaving early. Come say goodbye. They're very important supporters of the hospital's new pediatric wing." With an apologetic glance, Audrey was whisked away again, leaving me alone at the edge of her celebration. As I returned to my table, I overheard Eleanor speaking to a cluster of women nearby. "Yes, Audrey's background is rather modest, but she's adapted remarkably well. Quite the little social climber, though we'd never say so openly. Of course, with no proper guidance, the mother is just a secretary, you know. We've had to help smooth out her rough edges." The women tittered, glancing in my direction before quickly averting their eyes when they realized I'd heard. That was the moment something crystallized inside me, a realization that nothing I did would ever be enough for the Harringtons. No amount of gracious accommodation or silent endurance would earn their respect. In their eyes, I would always be just a secretary, an embarrassing footnote in Audrey's journey to their world. For the first time that day, a different thought emerged. What if I stopped trying to meet their impossible standards, and instead showed them exactly who just a secretary actually was? As I contemplated my next move, I noticed a distinguished gentleman approaching my table. I recognized him immediately as Joseph Brennan, CEO of Meridian Healthcare, one of the largest hospital systems in the Midwest. "Melissa Warner," he said warmly, extending his hand. "I thought that was you. It's been, 3 years since we finalized that communications infrastructure deal?" "Mr. Brennan," I replied, standing to greet him properly. 4 years, actually, but who's counting?" "How have you been?" "Prospering, thanks in no small part to that contract you helped shepherd through. Harold doesn't know how lucky he is to have you." He glanced around the table. "May I join you for a moment?" "I'd love to catch up." As Joseph sat beside me, I could feel curious stares from nearby tables. Eleanor Harrington, in particular, seemed to be watching with narrow-eyed assessment. "I didn't realize you knew the bride and groom," I mentioned. "I'm on the hospital board with Walter," he explained. "Though truthfully, I'm more interested in connecting with you. I've been trying to get a meeting with Harold about the new telehealth initiative for months. His assistant keeps telling me he's booked through September." I smiled, recognizing the gentle attempt at leveraging our connection. That would be Drew, and yes, Harold's schedule is quite full. But I might be able to find a breakfast slot in late July if the project timeline is pressing. Joseph's eyebrows rose. "You have that kind of influence over his calendar?" "I've managed Harold's professional life for 15 years, Mr. Brennan. There's very little regarding Westbrook Communications that doesn't cross my desk at some point." Our conversation continued, touching on industry developments and mutual connections. I was so engaged that I barely noticed the small crowd gathering nearby until a woman's voice cut through our discussion. "Melissa? Melissa Warner from Westbrook? I thought that was you." I looked up to see Catherine Prentice, the formidable CFO of Allied Technologies, approaching with genuine delight. Behind her was her husband, State Senator William Prentice. "The bride is your daughter?" Catherine continued. "I had no idea. She looks just like you." As Catherine and William joined our increasingly crowded table, more eyes turned in our direction. The senator's presence had a magnetic effect, drawing others from nearby tables. "Melissa's daughter just matched at Northwestern for her pediatric residency," Joseph informed them proudly, as though Audrey's accomplishment somehow reflected his own good judgment in knowing me. "Brilliant girl," Catherine agreed. "Must take after her mother." Within 20 minutes, my table near the kitchen had become an impromptu gathering of some of Chicago's most influential business leaders. Harold's wife Victoria arrived, kissing me on both cheeks and loudly lamenting that we'd been hidden away at this back table. The governor's chief of staff, whom Eleanor had specifically mentioned as a VIP guest, spent 10 minutes discussing a potential public-private partnership with Senator Prentice while standing directly behind my chair. From across the room, I could see the Harringtons watching in confusion and growing alarm. Eleanor whispered urgently to Walter, who kept glancing in my direction with a furrowed brow. The situation took an unexpected turn when Congressman David Holloway arrived late to the reception and made a beeline for our table. "Melissa," he called out. "There you are. Harold said you'd be here. Got a minute? I need your input on that press release for the infrastructure bill announcement." As the congressman pulled up a chair, discussing confidential policy matters as though we were in a secure briefing rather than a wedding reception, I caught Eleanor's expression changing from confusion to calculation. She began making her way toward our table, Walter in tow, a determined smile fixed on her face. "Congressman Holloway," she gushed, interrupting our conversation, "we're so honored you could attend. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Eleanor Harrington, Andrew's mother." The congressman looked up, momentarily disoriented by the interruption. "Ah, yes, lovely event. Melissa and I were just discussing some time-sensitive matters." "I see you've met Audrey's mother," Eleanor continued, her tone significantly warmer than any she'd used with me previously. "Such a surprise to see you all getting along so well." "Getting along?" Catherine Prentice laughed. "Melissa is the reason half of us can ever get anything done with Westbrook. She's practically a legend in Chicago business circles." Eleanor's smile froze as she processed this information. "A legend? But she's a executive assistant to the CEO," I supplied calmly. "Yes, that's my title." Senator Prentice chuckled. "Job titles can be so limiting, can't they? Melissa here has facilitated more major business deals in this city than most investment bankers I know." I watched the realization dawn on Eleanor's face. The sudden, horrifying understanding that the woman she had dismissed, humiliated, and hidden away was actually connected to nearly everyone of importance in the room. People whose social approval she craved, whose business relationships Walter cultivated, whose political influence they courted. All of them treated me with genuine respect and familiarity. In that moment, I saw something shift in Eleanor's expression. A calculation, an adjustment of strategy. I recognized it immediately as the look of someone who had severely underestimated an opponent and was now scrambling to recover. "Melissa," she said, her voice honey-sweet, "I had no idea you were so well-connected. You should have said something." The shamelessness of her pivot would have been amusing if it weren't so transparently self-serving. "Would it have mattered, Eleanor?" I asked quietly. Eleanor's question hung unanswered between us as the band announced it was time for toasts. The gathering at my table dispersed, with promises to reconnect later. Catherine Prentice squeezed my shoulder supportively before departing, while Joseph Brennan slipped me his card with a handwritten cell phone number. "For that July breakfast," he murmured with a wink. As the formal toasts began, first Walter, then Andrew's best man, I noticed Eleanor working the room with renewed vigor, stopping at various tables to whisper urgently. I recognized damage control when I saw it, having managed plenty of corporate crises at Harold's side. She was attempting to reshape the narrative before it solidified, likely positioning herself as the victim of a misunderstanding. The master of ceremonies announced the father-daughter dance, and I watched as Andrew led his mother onto the floor while Walter escorted Audrey. Another traditional moment altered to exclude me. I took a steadying breath, reminding myself that this wasn't about me. It was Audrey's day, and my feelings were secondary. As the dance concluded, Audrey broke away from Walter and approached the microphone. "Thank you all for celebrating with us today," she began, her voice clear and confident. "Tradition calls for a father-daughter dance, but as many of you know, I was raised by a single mother who was both mom and dad to me." "Mom, would you please join me?" A spotlight found me at the back table as murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw Eleanor start forward as if to intercept this deviation from the program, only to be restrained by Walter's hand on her arm. Their faces were rigid with barely contained displeasure. As I joined Audrey on the dance floor, the band began playing Wind Beneath My Wings, the song we had danced to in our living room when she graduated high school. It was a song I hadn't included on any of the planning lists, meaning Audrey had arranged this surprise independently. "I'm so sorry about today," she whispered as we moved across the floor. "I had no idea how they were treating you until Catherine Prentice mentioned it. She thought I knew you'd been seated in Siberia and was furious on your behalf." "It's all right," I assured her, though we both knew it wasn't. "It's not," Audrey insisted, "and I want to fix it starting now." As our dance ended, Audrey kept hold of the microphone. "I'd like to say a few words about my mother," she announced. "Many of you know her professionally, but I know her as the woman who worked 2 jobs to afford my science camp tuition, who proofread my medical school applications at 2 a.m. after working 12-hour days, who taught me that true class has nothing to do with money and everything to do with how you treat others." I felt tears threatening as Audrey continued, publicly acknowledging sacrifices I had never expected recognition for. From the corner of my eye, I saw Eleanor and Walter, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and calculation. They had clearly realized their error in judgment, but seemed uncertain how to proceed. As Audrey finished speaking, I noticed a commotion near the entrance. Harold Westbrook had arrived, fashionably late as always, his commanding presence drawing attention despite his attempt at a discreet entrance. Eleanor immediately detached from Walter and made her way toward him, hand extended in greeting. "Mr. Westbrook," I heard her gush, "what an unexpected honor. We had no idea you were acquainted with the couple." Harold's eyes swept past her, locating me instantly across the room. "I'm not here for the couple, Eleanor," he replied coolly. "I'm here to support my right hand and dear friend Melissa on her daughter's special day." The dismissal was subtle but unmistakable. Eleanor faltered visibly before recovering. "Of course. Melissa is... We're so fond of her. Such an integral part of the day." I felt a flash of satisfaction at her obvious discomfort, but it was quickly tempered by concern. I hadn't invited Harold, hadn't wanted to impose on his limited personal time, which meant someone else had contacted him. The question was, who and why? My answer came when Victoria Westbrook approached, kissing me on both cheeks. "Catherine called," she explained quietly. "Said you might need reinforcements." I felt a rush of gratitude for these unexpected allies, even as I recognized the dangerous game now unfolding. The Harringtons were socially and politically connected, particularly within Chicago's healthcare establishment where Audrey was building her career. Humiliating them publicly could have unintended consequences for my daughter. As I weighed my options, Eleanor appeared at my side, her expression carefully neutral. "Melissa, there seems to have been a misunderstanding with the seating arrangements. We've reset the head table. Your place is ready whenever you'd like to join the family." It was a transparent attempt at social damage control, not genuine remorse. Now that she understood my connections, I had suddenly become worthy of inclusion. "How kind," I replied evenly. "But I'm quite comfortable where I am, surrounded by friends." Eleanor's smile tightened. "I insist. Andrew's family should be together." "We are," I agreed. "Just not at your table." The flash of anger in her eyes confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't over. Eleanor Harrington wasn't accustomed to losing social battles, and she wouldn't surrender easily. The question now was how far I was willing to go to teach her a lesson without damaging Audrey's future in the process. The wedding reception continued with strained undercurrents visible only to those aware of the power struggle taking place. Eleanor had shifted tactics, now working overtime to showcase what appeared to be a close relationship between us. She posed for photos with her arm linked through mine, loudly referring to me as our Melissa whenever influential guests were within earshot. I endured this charade with outward composure while planning my response. The opportunity came when the wedding coordinator announced it was time for the mothers' speeches. Eleanor went first, delivering a polished address that spoke of family unity and her joy at welcoming Audrey and her wonderful mother into our circle. When my turn came, I approached the microphone with quiet confidence. The room fell silent, curiosity evident on many faces after the evening's unusual dynamics. 26 years ago, I began, I found myself alone and pregnant, with nothing but determination and hope to guide me. Today, I stand before you as the mother of Dr. Audrey Warner, feeling a pride words cannot adequately express. I spoke from the heart about Audrey's journey, her compassion, her brilliance. I thanked Andrew for loving her so completely. And then, I paused, my gaze finding Eleanor and Walter. I've been referred to several times today as just a secretary, I said calmly. It's true that my professional title is executive assistant, a role I've held with pride at Westbrook Communications for 15 years. What that title doesn't convey is that I've helped negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts, managed international crisis response, and yes, even coordinated events far larger than this beautiful wedding. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as I continued. I believe we all deserve to be judged by our character and contributions, not by perceptions or titles. Tonight, I've been reminded of the extraordinary community that has supported Audrey and me throughout our journey. People who recognize that true worth isn't measured by wealth or status, but by integrity, hard work, and compassion. I raised my glass. To Andrew and Audrey, may your marriage be built on mutual respect, genuine appreciation, and the understanding that every person's contribution has value, regardless of their title or position. The room erupted in applause as Eleanor and Walter sat frozen, their public mask of superiority shattered by my calm, measured words. I hadn't needed to explicitly call out their cruelty. Everyone who had witnessed their behavior understood exactly what I meant. As I returned to my seat, Harold Westbrook stood to shake my hand, a gesture immediately captured by the wedding photographer and several guests with smartphones. The image of Chicago's telecommunications titan showing public respect to just a secretary would speak volumes in their social circles. Eleanor's carefully constructed facade had crumbled, and there was nothing she could do to rebuild it. In the weeks following the wedding, the repercussions of that evening spread through Chicago's social circles like ripples in a pond. I hadn't needed to actively damage the Harringtons' reputation. They had accomplished that themselves by allowing their prejudice to be witnessed by the very people whose approval they coveted. Catherine Prentice called to tell me that Eleanor had been quietly removed from the Art Institute's fundraising committee, a position she had leveraged for social capital for years. Joseph Brennan mentioned casually during our July breakfast that Walter had been passed over for the hospital board chairmanship he had assumed would be his. Small, significant consequences that would sting far more than any public confrontation. Audrey and Andrew returned from their honeymoon to find the dynamics between our families permanently altered. When they hosted their first dinner party as a married couple, Eleanor arrived with a carefully selected gift for me, an expensive designer scarf I knew she expected me to fawn over. "How thoughtful," I said, accepting it with a polite smile. "I'll add it to my collection." Eleanor's attempt at reconciliation, or perhaps damage control, continued throughout the evening, her behavior almost comically deferential as she repeatedly mentioned my invaluable insights and impressive professional network. Walter, too, made strained efforts to engage me in conversation about Westbrook's latest telecommunications initiatives, clearly having researched topics he thought might impress me. I responded with unfailing courtesy, and the kind of genuine warmth they had never shown me, not because I had forgiven their cruelty, but because I had risen above it, and we all knew it. The most satisfying moment came a month later, when Andrew called to tell me he and Audrey had decided to decline Walter and Eleanor's offer to purchase them a house in the Harringtons' exclusive neighborhood. "We found a place closer to the hospital," Andrew explained. "And to you, Mom," he added, using the term that signaled his complete break from his parents' prejudice. The Harringtons' social embarrassment would eventually fade, but the shift in power between us was permanent. They had learned the hard way that titles and wealth don't determine a person's worth or influence. In their desperate scramble to preserve their social standing, they had inadvertently elevated mine. As for me, I returned to my desk at Westbrook Communications, managing Harold's complex professional life with the same efficiency and discretion I always had. Nothing about my job had changed, but everything about how I viewed it had. I was never just anything. I was Melissa Warner, respected professional, beloved mother, and a woman who had finally claimed her rightful place at the table, figuratively and literally. When an invitation arrived 6 months later for a charity gala hosted by the hospital board, I smiled at the handwritten note at the bottom from the event coordinator. Mrs. Warner, you'll be seated at the head table as requested. I tucked the invitation into my planner, already anticipating Eleanor's face when she saw exactly where just a secretary would be sitting this time.